Alright y'all, welcome back to the channel and to some more slug testing, and today we've got another new round that we've never tested, so I'm definitely excited to see what kind of performance we can get out of it, especially since this setup has been a little bit hit or miss. We've seen some great results with it, we've seen some terrible results with it. So with this setup being a little bit picky sometimes, if these perform well, then chances are they are a pretty good shell. We just got to try it and see what actually happens. But as for the shells I've got today, I brought out some of these. These are some Federal Power-Shok Sabot slugs. They are a 12 gauge, 2 3/4 inch, 1 ounce Sabot slug moving about 1500 feet per second. And here's what one of those shells looks like. I'll put a close up on the actual screen up here so you guys can see, but it's a pretty much what looks like an entirely lead projectile, just like your normal rifled slug would be, but this actually looks like it's molded into much more of a bullet shape. It's got a nice hollow point cavity down in there, so it should expand pretty nicely too if it were to hit an actual target. So definitely a pretty interesting projectile, that's for sure. And as for the setup we've got to run them through today, I brought out my Remington 870 Special Purpose. This was a retired police gun years ago, and it does have an 18.5 inch fully rifled cantilever barrel on it with a loopholed VX1 2-7x28 on top. This has been a very nice setup in our testing so far, but it has been a little picky with some ammo like I mentioned earlier. So we'll see what it can do and if it actually likes these Federal Power-Shok Sabot slugs or not. So as for today's test, everything is going to be set up the same as we usually do it when we do one of these slug tests. I don't have a million of these rounds, so we have to work with what we have. So we're going to do one group at 50 yards and another group at 100 yards, both of which will be 3-shot groups, and all of them will be run through the chronograph as well so we can get our velocity. It's not a perfectly scientific test, but it's what we have to work with, and it will at least give us an idea of if these are decent through this setup. So enough talking, let's go over here and get you guys a view of the target and the chrono and stuff. We'll take our two groups and we'll bring it back up here and measure some things and see what we actually got. I hope we see some nice results out of these shells, but I think it's going to come down to how well does the 870 actually like them. So let's head over here and take these shots and see what kind of results we get. Alright, so let's go through and look at our chronograph numbers here real quick before we take a look at our target. The boss claim is 1500, and for us only having an 18.5 inch barrel, I don't think we did too bad at mid 1300s. Now, they are definitely not what I would call a high velocity round, especially out of this specific shotgun, but that's still enough to take a deer with them out to 100 yards or so. So let's go through our numbers and see what we actually got. So for a high, we had 1385. For a low, we had 1331. That gave us an average of 1360 feet per second. And here is all the energy numbers and stuff for these shells at this velocity, so you guys can see what we're actually carrying down range. We had an extreme spread of 54 and a standard deviation of 18. So even though they are a little bit lower velocity in the grand scheme of things here, the boss claim is also lower than what we typically see out of a lot of Sabot slugs. So they're not bad overall. At least they seem pretty consistent, right in that mid 1300s range. So looking pretty realistic overall for velocity out of this shotgun. So let's head over to the target and take some measurements and see how they actually performed. Okay, so let's take a look here at our targets and see what kind of accuracy we were able to get. And right off the bat, I think they're pretty much middle of the road for what we've seen out of this setup. They're not the worst, but they're definitely not the best either. So we'll start over here on the left with this 50-yard target. This is the group we got. We'll measure that one and see what it actually gave us. All right, so 50 yards, we had a 3.44 inch spread, 3.5 inches or thereabouts at 50 yards. It's definitely usable, but typically in a slug gun, and I like to see, inch and a half or so at 50. But this isn't the worst we've seen either. If it's what you had, yeah, you could absolutely use it at 50 yards for a deer gun. But let's move over to this right-hand target over here and take a look at our 100-yard group. This one, I do think it's a little more open, but there definitely doesn't seem to be a huge jump in accuracy between 50 and 100 yards. Now, of course, this is not the round my shotgun is zeroed for, but let's measure the actual 100-yard group and see what we got. Okay, so that 100-yard group gave us a 3.94 inch spread. So we had over on the left a 3.4 and over on the right a 3.9. Definitely not a huge jump in accuracy, and that tells me that we probably could have gotten a little bit better at 50. Now for today's test, it was not a clean bore. It had probably about 20 to 25 rounds on it, but we did start with a cold bore this morning, so that could have played into it a little bit, I suppose. Either way, pretty much right at a 4-inch group at 100 yards. It's still usable on a deer all day long. You can absolutely take a deer with that. Is it what I was hoping to see or what I would ideally like to see? No, I would like to see 3 inches or under personally for a slug gun. We're not far off, so it's something that I would use if I had to use it, but I don't think it's something I would go out of my way to find either for my specific shotgun. So I guess kind of middle of the road results for today. They're not great, they're not terrible, but if it's what you had to work with, they do seem usable, which is more than we could say for several other shells that we've tested, that's for sure. Okay, and here's what one of those sabots looks like. There's definitely nothing fancy or special about it. It didn't fold over backwards. It didn't just crumble and tear all the pieces going through that rifling, which has been a pretty common problem here recently. People just not making their sabots tough enough to withstand the actual shot going through a rifled barrel. This one did perfect though. As you can see, we had nice rifle engagement down all of the pedals here. No damage or anything weird going on, and I think it did about as good as what it could have done, all things considered today. So nothing too weird to see here. All right, y'all. Well, what'd you think about those Power-Shok Sabot slugs? They are very much so middle of the road. They're not awful. They're not anything to write home about. They're not fantastic, but if it's what you had, it seems like it would be usable enough out to 100 yards. I don't think I'd push the bill much farther than that, especially at that velocity that we were seeing, but I do have a much shorter barrel than the factory used, so that is something to keep note of. I was hoping to see a little bit better accuracy out of them, but that's why we test things to see what my specific setup can actually do, because yours might really do well with these. Either way, a little bit disappointing, but not totally out of the realm of reality with these either, I suppose. But as always, leave your thoughts in the comments. Is that about what you expected to see? Were you a little surprised one way or the other? Have you tested any of these Federal Power-Shok Sabot slugs? And if so, what kind of results have you seen? Would you hunt with that? Or is that just a little bit too big of a spread for you? Let me know all that down below. But with that being said, I've got some more testing to get done for you guys, so I'm going to get back to it. As always, we have the channel Instagram as well as the mailbox where you can send stuff if you'd like. All that information will be in the description if you're interested in it, but I'm going to get back to it, so I'll see y'all in the next one.